What Michael Jordan accomplished in the 90s made him the GOAT. What he accomplished in the 80s shouldn't be dismissed. It categorically made him the single greatest individual talent we've ever seen. The feats that he was accomplishing made him the most important athlete of our time. That was even before he was winning championships. For many basketball fans, the 80s version of Jordan was more entertaining and dominant individually. You can watch any random game from that decade and you'll surely find a move that you've never seen before. The numbers he was posting was equally as impressive. During that span, he averaged a combined 32.6 points on 51% shooting, 6.2 rebounds, 5.9 assists, 2.8 steals, and 1.2 blocks per game. How many players have had a better 5-year stretch? You aren't going to find many. Here's what else he accomplished. He won an MVP, Defensive Player of the Year award, 3 scoring titles. He was selected to the All-NBA First Team 3 times, and the All-NBA First Team Defense 2 times. Including the playoffs, he posted 69 40-point games, 22 50-point games, and 21 triple-doubles. If he would have retired in 1989, he would have finished 11th in career 40-point games. He would have more than legends such as Steph Curry, Jerry West, Damian Lillard, and Dominique Wilkins. He would have finished 4th all-time in career 50-point games, and among the top 30 in career triple-doubles. That is easily a first-ballot Hall of Fame resume, and then some. But there's only so much that we can get from the numbers, so we're going to go through each season from the 80s. We're going to discuss the context of each season, and with each deep dive, we'll see exactly why this version of Michael Jordan was so special. The signs were right there in front of everyone. He showed why he would become the greatest player of all time right from the beginning. For 99% of basketball players, the first 2 seasons are to adjust at the pro level, to make your mistakes and grow. Very few can dominate the league right from the beginning. That list is even smaller when you're considered the best player in the league. Michael Jordan was one of those few exceptions. If you don't believe me, check out what was written in the UPI, or the United Press International, in 1985. They wrote that he won the 1985 NBA Player of the Year, and he was the first rookie to win the award in its 11-year history. This should not be confused with the Most Valuable Player award. That was won by Larry Bird. However, he endorsed Jordan as the league's best individual talent. He mentioned to the newspaper, quote, "I still feel he's the best in the league," end of quote. If you think that's the ultimate compliment, he went even further than that after one of their matchups during the season. This is what was written by the Chicago Tribune in 1985, quote, "Bird recently volunteered his vote for Jordan as the finest athlete he'd ever witnessed. He went off to say, he's the best ever." Wait, hold on for just a darn second. The best ever? Better than the reigning MVP himself? Better than Magic Johnson, Wilt Chamberlain, or Bill Russell? He went on to say, "Yup, at this stage in his career, he's showing more than I ever did, and I couldn't do what he did as a rookie," end of quote. Then he went on to explain in detail some of the breathtaking moves that he made at the expense of his team. No matter what they did, they couldn't stop him. This was proven in one of their matchups where Michael had a dominant performance. He ended up with 41 points on 56% shooting, 12 rebounds, 7 assists, and 4 steals. Larry Bird couldn't help but admire his showmanship and the never before seen moves, and the fact that he was toying with the defending champions must have instantly earned his respect. There was just something different about him, and Bird was able to recognize it from the start. But Larry wasn't his only victim. There were a multitude of legendary players who were able to see firsthand how special Jordan was. We first have Dominique Wilkins. Michael had an incredible all-around game. He had 45 points on 71% shooting, 10 assists, 8 rebounds, and 4 blocks against the Atlanta Hawks. Then there was George Gervin. He torched the Spurs with 45 points on 67% shooting, 10 rebounds, 4 assists, 3 steals, and 2 blocks. Then there was the player he was linked to the most, That's the Dr. Julius Erving. We don't want to forget how low the Sixers were that season. They also had Moses Malone, Maurice Cheeks, Andrew Toney, and the rookie Charles Barkley. Even with all that talent, Jordan gave the Sixers 40 points on 62% shooting. Although this came in a loss, the message was clear. No one was safe from a scoring onslaught. The bigger the moment, the greater the competition, he was going to rise to the occasion. The world was taking notice, and he quickly became the biggest attraction in the NBA. So much so that he was voted to start for the East team in the All-Star game. He even received more votes than Larry Bird and Dr. J. Some players didn't react well to that. That is when the infamous freeze-out game occurred. Depending on who you believe, his teammates at the All-Star game actively tried to give him as little opportunities to score. This video isn't about this well-documented event, so we won't go too in-depth about what happened. In retrospect, it feels like it was a misunderstanding between both parties. The veterans took his quiet demeanor during the All-Star weekend as cockiness, while he was trying to be respectful to the greats. But there's no doubt that he felt disrespected by how his teammates treated him. This is where the NBA world saw a whole other side to this rookie. 2 days after the freeze-out game, he faced a player that was allegedly the mastermind behind this conspiracy, Isaiah Thomas. It is not a coincidence that he had the best performance of his rookie season. You could tell that he was fueled with anger, but he knew how to channel that anger into play under control. It only makes him play better, as scary as that sounds. He ended the game with 49 points on 61% shooting, 15 rebounds, 5 assists, and 4 steals. I assure you that it's not speculation that he was fueled by the events that occurred at the All-Star game. During his Hall of Fame speech, he personally thanked Isaiah Thomas, Magic Johnson, and George Gervin for the alleged freeze-out game. He said he felt motivated to prove to them all why he was already at their level. Either you're born with that killer instinct or you have to adopt it. He had it right from the start. By the time the season ended, the numbers indicated that he was at their level. He led the league in points scored and was third in points per game. He also finished fourth in steals per game. From an analytical perspective, he finished second in win shares, offensive win shares, PER, box plus minus, and value over replacement player rating. In other words, he gave so much value to a team that struggled for years. The Bulls finished with the 7th best record in the Eastern Conference, and they were able to increase their win total by 11 games. These weren't just empty stats. He was carrying his team to playoff contention. That's what Larry Bird noticed, and he mentioned how important he was for the Bulls. He said this after calling him the best player, quote, "I have never seen one player turn a team around like that. All the Bulls have become better because of him. Orlando Woolridge will probably be an all-star for the rest of his career." End of quote. Larry knew a thing or two about turning a team's fortunes around as a rookie. Michael was displaying the same qualities he did in his legendary rookie season. The only thing he was off about was Orlando Woolridge being an all-star for the rest of his career. But that later would apply to Scottie Pippen. That's just the Michael Jordan effect. Now it was time to prove if he could rise to the occasion in the playoffs. Was he a great playoff performer in the beginning? Check out what happened in the first round against the Milwaukee Bucks. This was a team that won 59 games, 21 more wins than the Bulls, and had the second best record in the East. In Game 3, Jordan would give the NBA world a glimpse of what he ended up doing time and time again in the playoffs. With the Bulls down by 1, he made the game-winning jumper that gave the Bulls their only victory of the series. This remains one of Jordan's most underrated moments. It surely doesn't live up to all the other clutch shots he's made throughout his playoff career, but this proves that he was never scared of making the big shot. But the biggest sign from his early days that he would be the NBA's GOAT came in his sophomore season. He barely played in the regular season due to suffering a serious injury. He had very little time to play his way back into shape. To make matters worse, their first round opponent came against the Boston Celtics. This was the greatest team that he'd ever faced in his career. Even with the huge talent discrepancy, even while playing against a team that only lost once at home all season. Even while playing against the number 1 rated defense in the league, he scored 49 points on 50% shooting in Game 1. The Celtics had time to regroup and to make adjustments to stop Jordan, except the exact opposite happened. As we all know very well, he went on to record the highest scoring game in playoff history. He had 63 points on 54% shooting. That is when Larry Bird went from calling him the best player in the world to a god. He knew how special the 1986 Celtics were, and if they couldn't stop him, the rest of the NBA would be in huge trouble. That is where we knew he would be the NBA's greatest player. Better than Wilt Chamberlain when he averaged 50 points per game? Better than Kobe Bryant when he scored 81 points in a game and outscored a strong Dallas Mavericks team by himself? That's right. For reasons we're about to discuss, Michael Jordan had the greatest scoring season in NBA history. When did this happen? This was in the 1986-87 season when he averaged 37.1 points per game. Let's first start with a statistical case. He recorded the highest points per game average by any player since the NBA/ABA merger, which occurred in the 1976/77 season. If we account for all of history, it's the 5th highest points per game average. He also racked up the 3rd most total points scored for a single season. He scored a total of 3,041 points. The only other player to score over 3,000 points in a season is Wilt Chamberlain. Then we have this other impressive scoring feat. For most players, scoring over 40 points in a game would be one of the highlights of their season. But for MJ, it was considered a disappointment when he didn't score that much. He was able to score 40 or more points in 37 games. That's nearly half of the season. That is the 3rd most ever, behind only Wilt Chamberlain's 1962 and 1963 seasons. But that's not all. There were also 8 games where he scored 50 points or more. His season high was 61 points, which he did twice against the Atlanta Hawks and the Detroit Pistons. We'll talk more about that game later in this video. Here's another crazy accomplishment that Jordan had this season. Do y'all remember when Kobe Bryant scored 40 or more points in 9 consecutive games in the 2002/03 season? Well, Michael did the same thing. He scored 40 or more points in 9 straight games. After that historic streak, his arms got tired from all that shooting, and he was held to 11 points by the Milwaukee Bucks, which ended the streak. So just for good measure, he had 2 straight 40-point games that could have pushed the streak to 12 games. Speaking of sensational scoring streaks, Jordan also scored 50 or more points in 3 straight games. By the way, the only other player to match or surpass that streak in the modern era is Kobe Bryant. He scored 50 or more in 4 consecutive games in 2007. The numbers do not lie. What he did in that season was nothing short of historic, and we haven't seen anything like it since. But it's not just the numbers that make this season so impressive. Take into consideration the team that he was playing for. The Chicago Bulls were not a talented team by any stretch of the imagination. That was proven in the previous year when Jordan missed all but 64 games due to a broken foot. They had a 30-52 record. But that's not the only thing. Check out the roster from the 1985/86 Chicago Bulls. Take a look at their 4 leading scorers for the season. Their leading scorer was Orlando Woolridge. He was traded to the New Jersey Nets in the offseason for a 2nd-round draft pick. Next up, we have Quinton Dailey. He was their 2nd leading scorer, but he left to play for the Los Angeles Clippers. Their next leading scorer was the legendary George Gervin, but he left to play overseas in Italy. Now we have their 4th leading scorer, Sidney Green. He was also traded away for pieces that would end up being of no use to the Chicago Bulls. So this team that wasn't talented to begin with lost all of their best scorers. Who was called upon to help MJ on the offensive end? It was Charles Oakley, who was only in his 2nd season. That was a team that Michael Jordan was stuck with. I know we like to make fun of how bad the 2006 Lakers were, but this was way worse. If you don't believe me, check out what some of the media members were saying about this team during the season. Roy Johnson of the New York Times called the Bulls talent poor, and that their season will all come down to exhibitions of 1-on-5 basketball. Curry Kirkpatrick of Sports Illustrated wrote that the Bulls were a collection of untested rookies, veteran rejects, and Jordan. He also wrote that if Jordan concentrated on passing to the other Bulls, Chicago might finish 20-62 or 0-82. The Bulls were undeniably the least talented team in the league, and their losing record reflects that. The only way that they could remain competitive was for Michael Jordan to win games by himself. For nearly half the time, that's exactly what he did against professional basketball teams. The opposition knew that the Bulls had no one else that could generate offense. Even with every team putting all their attention on stopping Jordan, he still managed to nearly shoot over 50% from the field. But that's not the only factor that makes his efficiency so impressive. It should also be noted that he was playing high-intensity basketball on both ends of the court. He would make this incredible move at one end and then stop your best perimeter player at the other end. In fact, the numbers suggest that he was arguably the best perimeter defender in the NBA. For example, he averaged 2.9 steals per game, which was second in the league. He finished first among all guards in blocks. He had a 1.5 blocks per game average. In this regard, he made history. He became the first player to have more than 200 steals and 100 blocks in a season. Since then, only Hakeem Olajuwon and Scottie Pippen have been able to accomplish this feat. He also finished 4th in defensive win shares and 7th in defensive box plus minus. He wasn't like other players who only play one side of the floor to save energy. He was doing it all for this team. Take for example his performance against the 76ers when he had 56 points and 8 steals. Or his game against the Cavaliers when he had 43 points, 8 steals, and 5 blocks. But of all of his incredible performances, his favorite one came against the bad boy Pistons. Why is that? This is what he said to Sports Illustrated. Quote, "Because we won, and because I switched onto Adrian Dantley in the last few minutes, stole the ball 3 times, and held him without a basket. A victory for defense." End of quote. This was the game where he finished with 61 points on 56% shooting, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 steals, and 3 blocks. And you wonder why they invented the Jordan rules. It's because they had no answer for him. That is why I believe this is the greatest scoring season of all time. In the playoffs, they faced the same opponent as the previous year. The Boston Celtics won 59 games and were the best team in the East. You might know that the Bulls were swept again by this juggernaut. What you might not know was how close each game was. In Game 1, the Bulls were down by 19 points at halftime. But who was the one that led the comeback? Michael Jordan was relentless in the second half. He displayed a great balance of attacking and getting his teammates involved. This allowed them to tie the game late in the fourth quarter. However, Robert Parrish ruined his moment yet again with this jump shot. On the other end, as Jordan was looking to make his move, this happened.
Jordan holding left, now on the move against Dennis Johnson. Drops the ball.
Out of bounds. What is he out of bounds?
Brad Sellers was standing out of bounds.
It was a rookie mistake by Brad Sellers. It's a fitting example that proves how much their inexperience hurt them throughout the series. In Game 2, they were facing another double-digit deficit in the second half. And again, Michael led the comeback by making some of the most incredible moves. But the Celtics, with their all-star starting lineup, proved to be too good, while the Bulls kept making some head-scratching mistakes. In Game 3, although Jordan had a tough shooting performance, going 9 of 30 from the field, they had a lead going into the fourth quarter. They just couldn't hold on. Larry Bird scored 15 points in the fourth quarter. With that, they completed the sweep. But the Bulls were right there every game. The potential was there. They just needed to give MJ more help. Really, there's Michael, and then there's everybody else. Those words were uttered by Magic Johnson, according to writer Bob Bryant in his 1988 column. Although he was on his way to winning his 5th title, he was forced to recognize that Michael Jordan was in a class to himself. For those who make the claim that the only reason that he won all his titles and MVPs was that he played in the less competitive 90s era, check out the competition for the 1988 MVP race. Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, who averaged his career high in points, Isaiah Thomas, Hakeem Olajuwon, Charles Barkley, Karl Malone, John Stockton, Dominique Wilkins, and Clyde Drexler. They were all in their prime and they all played the full season. They are all considered by many as top 50 players, and Jordan was clearly a step above all of them. Keep in mind that this was before he was considered untouchable by the NBA media. He started getting that kind of respect when he started winning titles. Even during that time, when players needed to pay their dues before winning such a prestigious award, they recognized that what they were watching was special. All we have to point to is the multitude of records that he broke. He became the first and only player to win the MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, and scoring title in the same season. He is only one of 2 players to win the scoring and steals title in the same year. He has the highest win shares by any player since the merger. He has the highest value or replacement player rating of all time. This is only the second time that players average over 35 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists per game. He's one of 4 players to record over 200 steals and 100 blocks in a season, and he has the highest field goal percentage by any player that's averaged over 35 points. Statistically speaking, this is the greatest season in modern day history. Notice that he has 9 total categories where he ranks in the top 10 all time. What makes Jordan such a mystical character is that his actual performances were even more impressive than what the numbers say. For example, this is what Indiana Pacers coach Jack Ramsey said about him that season. Quote, "I think he is the best offensive player that I've ever seen. Just creatively with the ball, he's probably the best ever. When he gets going to the basket, he's tough because he's in the air. It's tough to defend a player in the air. You're not going to block his shot." End of quote. This is the same person that coached against Wilt Chamberlain, Kareem, Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, and Dr. J. He was more than qualified to make those remarks. That creativity is what allowed him to score at will. There were 4 games that he scored over 50 points. His season high came against the eventual Eastern Conference champions, Detroit Pistons. He recorded 59 points on 78% shooting. According to Sports Illustrated, Chuck Daly mentioned that they made up their minds right then and there that they needed to commit to a total team effort to stop him. In other words, the Jordan rules were in the works. The Celtics also didn't have any answers for him. He scored 50 points on nearly 60% shooting in the Boston Garden. Then there were 2 other games where he scored over 40 points. If those 2 teams couldn't stop him, the rest of the league were even more helpless. His performance art on the offensive end is what made him one of the most recognized athletes in the world. But his defensive abilities were finally getting the recognition it always deserved. He averaged career highs in steals and blocks. In fact, this was the season where he recorded the most blocks by a guard. No guard has been able to record over 131 total blocks, or 1.6 blocks per game. That season, he had more blocks than 16 of the starting centers in the league. Then we have what the Chicago Tribune wrote about Michael's defensive play that year. Quote, "When it comes to defense, Jordan has been assigned to the opposition's top scorer in critical situations. He has successfully defended offensive threats such as Charles Barkley, Alex English, Isaiah Thomas, Adrian Dantley, Mark Price, and Dominique Wilkins." End of quote. At the time, no one was questioning how immensely valuable he was on defense. That has only been questioned until just recently. It has been reported that the Bulls stat keepers would reward him with steals or blocks that he never made. This has caused some to question if he was truly deserving of winning the Defensive Player of the Year award. But here's the reality of the situation. In 1986, when he missed nearly 80% of the season, the Bulls had the worst defensive rating in the league. In the following year, they jumped all the way up to 11th. In 1988, they had the third best defensive rating. Who deserves the bulk of the credit for that improvement? The player that led his team in steals and blocks, and that was a 6'6" shooting guard. Let's keep in mind that players such as Scottie Pippen and Horace Grant were rookies. They were coming off the bench. This team relied heavily on Michael on both ends of the floor. On offense, there was no one else that averaged over 13 points that played more than 30 games. This was still very much a one-man team, and they were still able to win 50 games. It's no wonder that he was awarded the MVP in one of the most competitive races ever. Although the NBA world was used to seeing him perform at this level in the regular season, it was time to get some playoff success. So he responded by making history. In the first 2 games of the playoffs, he scored back-to-back 50-point games while shooting over 50%. No one, not even Wilt, has been able to score back-to-back 50-point games in the playoffs. This was the beginning of Jordan being known as the Cavs killer. When he wasn't scoring over 50 points, the Bulls had a hard time beating the Cavaliers. They tied the series at 2 apiece, and it all came down to the deciding Game 5. The biggest adjustment is when Doug Collins went to Scottie Pippen right before the game and told him he would be starting. He responded by having the best game of his young career. He had 24 points on 50% shooting, 6 rebounds, 5 assists, and 3 steals. It was the first glimpse of what would end up being the greatest NBA duo in league history. Then Michael did the rest. He scored 12 of his 39 points in the fourth quarter. For his first playoff series win, he made even more history. He averaged 45.2 points per game on 56% shooting. That is the second highest average for a playoff series ever. That is what was required of him in order for the Bulls to win a series. But it was going to take a lot more than that to defeat their second round opponent. The Detroit Pistons were too good of a team to allow one player to beat them. The Bulls were able to steal Game 2 thanks to Jordan and Sam Vincent scoring over 30 points. That was the exception. For the rest of the games, they did a great job of making the rest of the Bulls players non-factors. Michael had himself a respectable series. He averaged 27.4 points on 49% shooting, 8.8 rebounds, 4.6 assists, and 2 steals per game. It was obvious that this team was not ready to compete against a championship caliber team. Michael's scoring was only going to get them so far. That might have played a role in what he was going to do next. For those who believe that Michael Jordan was nothing more than a volume scorer, you might want to close your ears if you don't want to be bombarded with statistics that say otherwise. That also includes his former teammate, Scottie Pippen, who apparently believes that Michael Jordan was a quote, horrible player before he showed up and saved his legacy. But what I'm about to tell you is not an over-the-top statement, nor is it an opinion. The season that we're about to discuss by Michael Jordan is arguably the greatest all-around season in NBA history. We're talking about the 1988/89 season. Before we get to the numbers, a few things need to be stated. First, Doug Collins was the head coach for the Bulls, which means the triangle offense implemented by Phil Jackson had nothing to do with the numbers that Jordan recorded. And secondly, Scottie Pippen was in his second year, and he was not one of the top players in the league. He averaged a pedestrian stat line of 14.4 points per game, 6.1 rebounds per game, and 3.5 assists per game. With that out the way, we can now talk about Michael's numbers. He averaged 32.5 points per game on 53.8% shooting, 8 assists per game, 8 rebounds per game, and 2.9 steals per game. This is only the second time in NBA history that a player has averaged over 32 points, 8 rebounds, and 8 assists. That other player isn't Oscar Robertson, Russell Westbrook, or James Harden. It was Luka Doncic that posted those numbers in the 2022/23 season. Now here's where this season ranks among many of the major per game and advanced statistics for a single season in NBA history for the shot clock era. As you can see, there are 10 total categories where he ranks in the top 20. As the numbers indicate, Michael Jordan was statistically one of the league's best defenders. He finished with the highest defensive box plus minus, the 5th highest defensive win shares, and he nearly averaged 3 steals per game. Let's not forget that when we say all around, we don't just mean scoring, rebounds, and assists. It should include both ends of the floor. And let's be honest, players such as Oscar Robertson, Russell Westbrook, and Luka Doncic were never the top defenders in the NBA. For this season, Michael Jordan could have very easily won the MVP and the Defensive Player of the Year award for his 2nd consecutive season. The end of the year rankings also indicate that Jordan was the best player in the world, and it wasn't even close. He finished first in scoring, win shares, offensive win shares per 48 minutes, value over replacement player rating, box plus minus, offensive box plus minus, defensive box plus minus, PER, and minutes per game. He also finished 3rd in steals and 10th in assists. The only reason that he was snubbed from winning the MVP was that the Bulls finished with the 6th best record in the Eastern Conference, and they finished with the worst record than the previous year. Understandably, the voters were going to reward the player that helped lift their team to one of the best records, and they gave the award to Magic Johnson. To no fault of Michael, the Bulls were struggling throughout the year. They just didn't have enough offensive weapons to lighten Jordan's load. For example, Sam Perkins of the Dallas Mavericks told Sports Illustrated, quote, "Michael plays it down, but he's a one-man team," end of quote. Then Sacramento Kings coach Jerry Reynolds told the magazine, quote, "He needs a complementary player. The only way to take a pressure off a guy like that is to put more great players around him," end of quote. In an attempt to rejuvenate the Bulls' slumping offense, head coach Doug Collins made the decision on March 11th to move Jordan from shooting guard to point guard. So for the next 24 games leading up to the playoffs, Jordan averaged a combined 30.4 points per game on 49.8% shooting, 10.7 assists per game, 9.2 rebounds per game, and 2.5 steals per game. That also includes a 15-game stretch where he had 11 triple-doubles, and he had 7 straight games where he posted a triple-double. To illustrate how the league was reacting to this new change, here's a quote from an article that I found in the Atlanta Journal and Constitution from 1989. Quote, "Michael Jordan now plays point guard, which means the Chicago Bulls give the ball more often to the NBA's most productive offensive player. No other NBA player has made a change of more league-altering significance. Los Angeles Lakers point guard Magic Johnson played center against Philadelphia in the 1980 NBA Finals, but that lasted only 1 game. In just 16 games at point guard, Jordan has gone from the league's leading scorer in the last 2 seasons to being lumped with Johnson, John Stockton, and Isaiah Thomas as the elite among NBA point guards. Jordan may already be the best of the group," end of quote. You can't blame him for wondering if he could have been the best point guard in the league with Jordan posting Oscar Robertson-like numbers. Now let's check out some of the crazy individual performances that he was having. For instance, there were 5 games where he scored over 50 points. Most notably, he had 52 points on 82.8% shooting against the Sixers. That is currently tied for the 5th most efficient 50-point performance in history. Then there was a game against the Boston Celtics when he had 52 points on 55% shooting, 9 steals, 3 rebounds, 2 assists, and 2 blocks. This is the only time in history that a player has posted over 50 points and 9 steals in a game. He had this other crazy game against the Celtics where he nearly posted a quadruple-double. He recorded 42 points on 57% shooting, 11 assists, 9 rebounds, and 8 steals. His regular season was historic. However, it didn't translate to more victories for the Bulls. They won 47 games, 3 less than the previous year. Although there was no one close to reaching his individual greatness, his lack of team success was the biggest reason he was snubbed from winning the MVP. His chance to prove all his doubters wrong came in the first round against the Cleveland Cavaliers. This was a team that won 57 games, 10 more than Chicago. They were heavily favored to win that series. Michael knew he would need to play out of his mind, and that's what he did. He posted over 30 points and 10 assists for the first 2 games. In Game 3, he had one of the most underrated playoff performances. He posted 44 points, 10 assists, 7 rebounds, and 5 steals. The Bulls were in the perfect position to upset the Cavs at home. But in Game 4, he had one of the most bittersweet 50-point games. He missed a free throw with 9 seconds left that would have given Chicago a 3-point lead. Instead, Brad Daugherty sent the game into overtime with 2 free throws, and they eventually won the game. Jordan told the Chicago Tribune afterwards that it was the lowest he's ever felt in basketball. He was looking to make up for that in the most dramatic way possible. Game 5 was an absolute thriller from start to finish. The last 3 sequences were especially exciting. Jordan made a clutch jumper over Larry Nance with 6 seconds left. Then Craig Elo made a layup that took the lead with 3 seconds left. That is what set up one of the most historic playoff buzzer beaters ever.
The inbounds pass comes into Jordan. Here's Michael at the foul line. A shot on Elo. Good! The Bulls win it! They win it!
It's famously known as the shot. This firmly established him as the greatest clutch performer in the game, and he never looked back. The second round series against the New York Knicks also came with some classic moments. In Game 1, he posted his first playoff triple-double. That includes scoring 9 points in the overtime period that helped the Bulls steal the game. For the next 3 victories, they needed Michael to focus more on scoring. He responded by scoring over 40 points for each of those victories. This series is considered by many as his greatest all-around effort of his legendary playoff career. He averaged 35.7 points on 55% shooting, 9.5 rebounds, 8.3 assists, 2.5 steals, and 1.3 blocks per game. This proves that the Bulls were still very dependent on him to win games. We learned from the 1988 season that this wasn't going to work against the bad boy Pistons. Or would it? The Bulls took a 2-1 series lead. This came after an incredible Game 3 performance. He scored 46 points on 62% shooting and even made the game-winning shot. That's right, this playoff run includes 2 game winners. The Pistons learned the hard way that it's impossible to stop him one-on-one. For the rest of the series, they changed their defensive game plan. Wherever he went, he was surrounded by 3 defenders, and he had no choice but to surrender the ball to one of his teammates. At this point, they weren't ready to exploit the open looks they were getting. They even forced him to only 8 shot attempts in Game 5. That is extremely impressive considering how aggressive of a scorer MJ was. The Bulls didn't win another game, and they lost the series 4-2. But this playoff run proved that Michael could lead a team far in the playoffs. He just needed the right pieces in the right system in place. What he did in the 90s took his legacy to another level. But what he accomplished in the 80s helped set up the greatest modern dynasty in NBA history. But what about you all? What is your favorite Michael Jordan memory from the 80s? What do you think was his best season from that decade? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.